Who or what position will be the X factor for the Gophers? Who, baby, let's talk some football.
Hey,
You are Locked On Golden Gophers.
No matter what we're going to do here, we're just going to keep rowing.
Your daily podcast on the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
However it turns out, we're just going to keep rowing.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
We're just going to keep rowing, and keep rowing.
You're listening to Locked On Golden Gophers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name's Kane Rob, host of the podcast, former collegiate football video coordinator and recruiting assistant, here to talk Golden Gophers with you each and every day of the week. Once we get out of this off season, and that starts in the last week of July, we're almost there, where we're talking 5 days a week. Gophers, 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 your daily podcast for Gophers content. So be sure to hit subscribe over on YouTube and follow wherever you get your podcasts at Locked On Golden Gophers. We are going to have an absolute rock star year 2, and we're almost to 1,000 subscribers over on YouTube. So join in on the fun, join in on the Gophers goodness, and let's get that community built up. I can't wait to be back at it again, talking Gophers every single day with you, day in and day out. And it's going to be a fun football season. There's a lot of projections for this Gophers team, and it's very difficult to do with a difficult schedule, but with a lot of talent on the roster. So it feels like there's so many different directions that this thing could go, and we're going to go into every single idea, opportunity, projection that we have, and you're not going to want to miss out on it. Now, today, we are talking about PJ Fleck, who is now one of the most tenured coaches in the Big Ten. We're going to talk about that, as well as Minnesota's X Factor for 2023 and 3 most difficult games to project in the 2023 season. So sit back, relax, let's talk some Gophers. And if there's any point where you're like, I don't know if I agree with that, drop it in the comments. I want your thoughts. I want to know what my other fellow Gopher fans are thinking. But let's wait no further. Let's jump in. Only 3 coaches have been in the Big Ten longer than PJ Fleck at this point. Coach Pat Fitzgerald with Northwestern has been dismissed from his position, fired from his position after some allegations, some scandals happening out in Northwestern. Absolutely terrible story out there, and I don't want to dive too much into that because I don't know the facts with that whole situation. But what I do know is Coach Pat Fitzgerald is gone. Now, there are only 3 coaches with longer tenures in front of Coach Fleck, and that is Coach Ferentz with Iowa. He's been there 25 years. Coach Harbaugh with Michigan, tripping right there, 10 seasons. And then we've got Coach Franklin with Penn State, 9 seasons overall. And then you've got Coach Fleck and Coach Allen with Indiana, tied with 7 seasons each. Now, the Allen one, I'm kind of surprised he's still there, to be honest. They haven't really had a whole lot of success in those 7 seasons, whereas on the flip side, Coach Fleck has been getting bowl game victories and been in the conversation in the West the entire time, except for maybe a season. And even though we haven't won the West Division, even though we haven't gotten to a Big Ten championship game, you can see the trajectory going up. You can see the progression, whereas IU, they had a good COVID season, but outside of that, have they really done that much? So that one it threw me off. I didn't think he had been there the same amount of time as Coach Fleck. Now, the removal of Coach Fitzgerald also makes it so there is only one coach who has won the Western Division. That's Coach Ferentz in Iowa. Otherwise, we've got a new coach at Wisconsin, a new coach at Purdue, a new coach coming in at Northwestern, and then on top of that, you've got a new coach at Nebraska. That leaves you with Iowa, Minnesota, and Illinois as the final schools that still have returning coaches in that West Division. Now, there are 4 new head coaches in the division, and with that, one would think this late into the process, Northwestern will most likely hire an interim coach as opposed to going full scale, all out coaching interviews and full sweeping hires, trying to find this new head coach, not a full blown search, because there are only 3 weeks until fall camp really starts to kick off for these schools. So that being said, I think that they will dive deep into which coaches had any affiliation with the stuff going on at Northwestern. It isn't good at all, to say the least. And so they're really going to dive in deep. We might not have an answer who an interim coach would be for another week or two. So it's really going to be late in the game for Northwestern. They were already a program that was struggling mightily in the win column since basically the COVID year. They had some success, and then the next 2 years after that, it has not been pretty. It's not been pretty at all. I think they had a 3-win season and a 1-win season. So it has been rough, to say the least. Coaching change is definitely needed. Culture change is absolutely needed. But I don't know how vast it'll be this season, and it doesn't look promising for the Wildcats, even less so than it did 2 weeks ago. So now, it's not to say that because there are 4 new head coaches in the West Division that they can't do well in their first year and that they can't win games against teams that have coaches with veterans. Obviously, that isn't the case. But it definitely plays into Minnesota's favor that they'll catch some of these newer teams still working out the kinks, still getting into their what they stand for, what style of play they have. Some of these teams are still going to be having position battles, some of them at the quarterback position. So there are a lot of changes systematically on both the offense and defense for a lot of these teams. There are changes personnel-wise, and there is just so much change that when you catch these teams early, it usually plays a little bit in your favor, having more experience coming back, having more continuity, having more people who have been a part of your system and your program, even if they haven't started at this point. Even if we have guys stepping into new starting roles, they've been a part of the culture and the system that's been building for over years now. So overall, that should play into Minnesota's favor in some of these situations, especially probably the early 2 in Nebraska and Northwestern, which both come in that first opening 4-5 weeks of the season. But when you get to those 2 later ones, the Purdue and the Wisconsin wraps up the season. Purdue is like the third to last game in the season. I would expect that slight advantage might be erased at that point because you're already gelling. You know what you're getting into. You know how it's worked for 8, 9, 10, even 11 weeks already now. At that point, that slight advantage goes away, but the whole change overall will be something that the Gophers have maybe in their favor early on. And it'll be something to really keep an eye on with this West Division. I think it's really wide open. In my opinion, today, on July 11th, if I had to choose a team to win the West, I think I lean Iowa, but I think Minnesota will be in the conversation. And that Iowa game after the bye week is going to be massive. I think the Ohio State and Michigan games, a lot of people are marking those up as losses. If Minnesota can stay in those games, if they can be in the conversation, if they can pull an upset in one of those 2, that would be massive. But if you can pull an Iowa game, if you can pull the UNC game, you start to get the opportunity to really insert yourself and assert yourself into the winning the division conversation. So that's something we'll talk about. And we're going to talk about the 3 games that we shouldn't really overlook. We talked about Nebraska a couple weeks ago, but 3 games that are the most difficult to project. We're going to talk about that in just a bit. But first, I want to talk about Minnesota's X factor for the 2023 season. We're diving deep, and it is going to be major key for the Gophers in this upcoming season. That's coming up next. First, I got to talk to you about our friends over at Bird Dogs. Now, Bird Dogs make you look good. They have stretch khaki shorts that they're designed to fit slimmer and through the thigh and the leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. I'm not gonna lie to you, when I'm rocking my Bird Dogs on the golf course, when I'm walking to work downtown and I look in the building reflection, I'm like, dang, my legs kind of look good. Okay, Bird Dogs, I see you, and you can feel that way too. All you got to do is head on over to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. And when you're there, you get to do something extremely nice and get something free. Who doesn't love free? My saying is always, if it's free, it's me. So if you head on over to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, or you enter promo code Locked On College, you get a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddog.com/Locked On College, or use promo code Locked On College, and they're gonna throw that free Yeti tumbler in for free. So definitely check it out, give it a run. Head on over to birddogs.com right now /Locked On College to take advantage. Now, Gophers fans, thank you so much for tapping in each and every day that we put this podcast up. Now, we've been doing 3 days a week in this off season, but we're almost there. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any content. But later this week, we are going to have a show with Dylan Laux and do some hockey talk. The future of hockey. Is Logan Cooley coming back? Is there anything to be worried about and what to be excited about, and so much more? So be sure to hit subscribe so you tap into that. But today we're talking about football. We're talking about Minnesota's X Factor for 2023. Now, I think there are two potential answers to who is the X Factor in 2023. I think there's the individual answer, and then there's the group answer. Now, the individual answer for me is Ethan Kaliakmanis. There's so much in his hands being a new starter. Now, he had started about 5 games, kind of 4.5 because the bowl game he got injured, but about 5 games last season. You saw the progression, especially late in the season when they finally let him throw the ball and kind of ran the offense around his skill set. Well, they're going to do that the entire year this year. They're going to have this entire offense built for Ethan Kaliakmanis and the rest of the personnel of this team. So it's not going to look exactly like what we saw with Tanner Morgan, because those two quarterback play styles are completely different. So we're going to have a lot of pressure on Ethan Kaliakmanis. We're going to have to be patient with Ethan Kaliakmanis, but a lot of the upside, a lot of the projections, a lot of what will happen and what the games will come down to is how Ethan Kaliakmanis performs this year. And that's not you don't want to put a ton of pressure on the new guy, but if anything, I know he can handle it after talking to his pops, after talking to him in the pressers, after being around him. You get the energy, the mantra. He is ready to step up for any challenge and he won't back down from it. So I am excited to see him perform. But the group answer, I said there are 2 answers. I gave you the individual, which is obvious because the quarterback always plays a huge factor. But the group answer, in my opinion, the most important X factor of the season is the offensive line. Now, the offensive line being more productive and more effective and more protective of that quarterback is going to help Minnesota in a vast amount of ways, because it opens up opportunities for the Minnesota Gophers. Not only does it keep the running game a threat, even though we don't have our All-American of Mo Ibrahim coming back, we have some young guys in the room. We've got some transfers coming in, but it helps open up the run game for those guys. It helps make the run game still a threat, even though we don't have that All-American. And it also helps with the backs that we have that home run hitting ability, that ability to break away a 70-yard touchdown and finish it with a touchdown as opposed to getting caught or hawked down. So overall, that's going to be huge, because when the ground game is still a threat, when they can't, throw an extra defender back there in pass coverage because they know that they can get through to the run, get through the O-line, get run stops, and make the Minnesota pass the ball, and kind of the opposite of what we've seen for the last 2 years, as opposed to stacking the box and trying to make Minnesota pass and really selling out for the run. It could be the opposite if we couldn't run the ball, but we will be able to run the ball. I am certain of that. And how effective it is depends on the offensive line. Now, not only in the run game, but also the offensive line being more aggressive, being more protective, and giving more time in the pocket should allow for advantages and mismatches in the wide receivers, in the tight end space. It should allow the more mismatches and advantages in the Gophers' favor when it comes to coverage due to the depth of the pass catchers. You've got Elijah Spencer, who has absolutely shown out, not only in the spring, but in Charlotte, where he potentially looked better to some scouts than their wide receiver who just got drafted in the NFL. Elijah Spencer has that type of talent. His release package is everything. And on top of that, he's worked and developed through his high school years with a coach that also was a coach for Jalen Hyatt, and that was a coach for Antonio Williams, who was awesome as a true freshman last year with Clemson Tigers. Elijah Spencer, you can see the similarities. You can see the hard work that he has put in to be honed in his craft. He has a great IQ on the field, and it's going to show. He's going to be hard to cover. So you've got him. We've already known that Chris Autman-Bell has been difficult for people to cover in the Big Ten when he's healthy. Daniel Jackson has put that on full front this last season. Then Brevin Spann-Ford, we already know he is a mismatch nightmare with his size, with his speed, with his athleticism. And now you're saying you can't put your best type of defenders on him necessarily because you've got 3 wide receivers and Brevin that are all going to give you troubles, all going to give you some advantage at some point in the game. And I haven't even brought up guys like Christian Hoskins with his speed, Corey Crooms, and the veteran presence that he brings and understanding where he needs to be on the field from the slot. And on top of that, Lemeki Brockington, who has been getting better and better and better to the point where the trust in him is only growing. And we absolutely saw him explode in the spring game as well as a huge touchdown in Wisconsin to help bring that game into a W last year. So many weapons, so much trust in those weapons, chemistry built with this young quarterback. That is going to be huge if that quarterback gets more time to find the mismatch, find the opening, and take advantage of it as the O-line gives him the time. Now, it's not just the run game. It's not just the more time for the wide receivers, but more protection also equals more of a threat of Ethan as a runner on the field too. Now, the only negative that can come with protecting longer is that maybe it could lead to more penalties, but that shouldn't be a worry for you as a Gopher fan, because this is what the Gophers have been in the country when it comes to penalized teams over PJ Fleck's tenure. Last year, Minnesota was the best team, number 1 in the entire country, with the least amount of penalties last season. The year prior to that, 2021, they were 10th in the nation, least amount of penalties. 2020, 15th in the nation, least amount of penalties. 2019, 8th in the nation, least amount of penalties. 2018, 5th in the nation, least amount of penalties. And 2017, 1st in the nation and least amount of penalties. That's right. Minnesota has been a top 15 team in the nation for all of PJ Fleck's tenure when it comes to the least amount of penalties in the country. 5 out of the 6 of those years, they were top 10. 3 out of those 6 years, they were top 5. And 2 out of them, they were best in the entire country. Minnesota has been disciplined, and I do not expect that to change one bit. That is the culture, that is the program, is how they have asserted themselves in that space, as well as the ball. The ball is the program. We hear that all the time with Coach Fleck. So you talk about the discipline. I don't think that's going to change one bit. On top of that, the O-line is going to feature probably a lot of veterans. You've got 2 returning starters on that offensive line. You've got 2 fifth-year guys that are back in Carter Shaw and Nathan Bowe that will likely be starters and heavy impact players alongside of them. That means 4 of your players will have a vast amount of experience as an offensive lineman. So to me, the offensive line is the X factor because it not only assists in each facet of the offense and how it is built, but it will also be the key because the Big Ten has some of the best defenses in the entire country, year in and year out. And upcoming this schedule this year, we've got Michigan, we've got Iowa, we've got Ohio State, we've got Illinois. We'll see if Wisconsin can get back to being a top defensive unit. That's 5 teams right there that are typically in that top 15, top 20 conversation for top defenses each and every season, all of whom who are on the schedule for the Gophers in 2023. So the O-line is going to be massive, and I think the biggest X factor for the upcoming season. We know the defense is going to be shaped around the personnel, and Coach Rossi has found success with that year in and year out. We know the running game typically works out. We know that the quarterback has some experience, but like I said, individually, he's an X factor by himself as a single player. And then we know we have depth in the wide receiver room. So the O-line, a lot hinges on them. And I'm excited to see what they do in the next season. Now, we're going to wrap this one up, like I said, with 3 games in the 2023 year that I think are difficult to project without seeing the new iterations of the team. That's how we're going to wrap this one up. Coming up next. All right, Gophers fans, 3 games that are going to be the most difficult to project, in my opinion, for the Gophers heading into this 2023 season. Now, the things that these 3 games have in common are that all 3 of them have a quarterback change. All three have lost major production when it comes to players to the portal or players to the NFL. And 2 have potential system changes on a larger scale front. Now, it's also unique to know that these 3 games on the schedule are all back to back, in my opinion, because it's in the back half of the season where we've already kind of got an idea of what the outlook of this season is going to be, or how it's playing out, or what the possibilities are. Is the division still, the division title still on the line for the Gophers? Are we fighting for a bowl game at that point? Where are we in the season and the trajectory of it? We'll know that when we hit this stretch of games. So it's also on top of that Minnesota will likely need to win in order to have a realistic shot at the division. They will likely be favored in every single one of these games, and they cannot succumb to dropping a game when it is expected to be a win. Now, we've seen that over the last few years. The Purdue game last year, I believe the Illinois game we were favored, but that one a little closer. The Purdue game we were expected to win. 2 years ago, Bowling Green. I don't have to say too much more about that. But Illinois 2 years ago, we were expected to win. We've dropped 1 or 2 games where we are expected to win the last 2 seasons for sure. And that cannot happen if Minnesota wants any shot at the division this year. But especially with the difficulty of the schedule, with Michigan and Ohio State being on there, playing a Heisman candidate in Drake May, and having to take on the rivals in Wisconsin and Iowa, having 5 games that could be toss-ups or losses, you cannot drop these games when you're expected to win. Now, the 3 teams that I'm talking about is Michigan State, Illinois, and Purdue. Those are the 3 games I think are the hardest to project for this upcoming season. Because with Michigan State, you've got a starting quarterback battle still to be determined with Noah Kim and Caden Hauser. On top of that, the coach might have the hottest seat in the Big Ten. And so there's a lot of pressure on him to get wins that they're not supposed to put their name back into the elite conversation, to be a winning program. And you know what? They're going to scrap and try to do anything possible to keep that coach's job. Now, on top of that, they lost their quarterback to the transfer portal. They lost their main wide receivers and their number 1 production receiver, who is an NFL level talent, to the transfer portal. The defense has been suspect for back-to-back years. Now, some of that could be due to injuries. Some of that could be due to other circumstances. But last year, they were 96th in the run defense, and they were 87th in the pass defense. And then 2 years ago, they were dead last in the nation when it came to pass defense. So there are a lot of reasons the Gophers should win this game. But like I said, they're going to have the hunger. They're going to have the tenacity. They're going to have the scrappy grit to try and make an upset, especially after we went to East Lansing last year and absolutely put on a clinic over the Spartans. Don't be surprised if they're hungry to try to return the favor when they won't be favored in this game. Now, the second one is Illinois. Illinois has been giving us problems over the last 2 years. We haven't been able to beat Coach B. And you know what? There's positives to why we should be in this and why we will be favored. But you can never underestimate a Coach Bielema team. Now, starting quarterback, gone. Very key defensive backs, gone to the NFL. The quarterback is now in the NFL with the Giants. I think he's the 3rd quarterback on the Giants right now. Their workhorse running back, gone to the NFL. Chase Brown, their running back, accounted for nearly 40% of all of their yardage last year on the offensive side of ball and 30% of their touchdowns. That is massive. I don't care. I mean, Mo was that for us too, so I can't downplay that. But instead of the upside and the talent that I'm intrigued by, instead of a major transfer that we've brought in on our room, they're returning with Reggie Love and Josh McCray, who have both been in the system, but they haven't really shown like they can be to the level and the standard that Chase Brown put out there last year. Now, I think even with all of that, the biggest loss might be Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator, the DC that gave all teams, not just the Gophers, not just here and there. They were in the fight with Iowa. They were in the fight with a whole bunch of teams last year because that defense was nasty. And now the defensive coordinator moving on definitely is going to be a huge impact for Illinois. We'll see how big it is because they still have a nasty front seven. We'll see if that front seven lives up to expectations with the new defensive coordinator. But speaking of that defensive coordinator, moving on, that is the final school that I think is the hardest to project in this upcoming season. That's Purdue. Now, Ryan Walters headed over there, and they have a new quarterback, potentially overhyped in my opinion when it comes to the new offensive coordinator. We'll see if he can prove that hype should be there. But they lost huge contributors on the offensive side of ball in Aiden O'Connell, Charlie Jones, and Payne Durham. Those three led Purdue big time, along with Maccabee, to the Big Ten championship game. Now, they weren't able to take down Michigan, and they also didn't have those guys in the bowl game, and we saw them get absolutely torn apart in the bowl game without those guys. Now, they've had a year now to practice with their new squad, but they have system changes on the offense. They've got system changes on the defense. Now, if we know anything about Ryan Walters, you know that he can coach one heck of a defense, and Maccabee, also the running back, can run the mess out of that ball. So they'll be a force, but the QB is a major question mark to me. Now, yes, some platforms have Hudson Card, the transfer from Texas, rated as one of the best transfers, if not the best transfer quarterback coming in this transfer class from last year. But what is that based on, I ask? Because he was constantly in a battle for the quarterback position in his time with Texas. First, it was a battle with Casey Thompson. Casey Thompson, who wasn't able to really thrive at Nebraska. He had moments of brilliance, but he wasn't a Big Ten quarterback that could last. Injuries took it apart. Some turnovers took it apart. And so he couldn't beat out Casey Thompson at Texas. And then he goes and he's competing against Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers had some struggles along the way. Now, he was a super hyped prospect, one of the best in his class, transferred from Ohio State after redshirting his freshman year. But what I'm saying is he wasn't ever able to win the job in Texas. So how is he the number one transfer when you've guys got like Tanner Mordecai, who absolutely blew it up in SMU? When you've got guys that have started for multiple years and went to different programs that have a lot of upside and have actually done the winning and shown the potential on the field. That's where I'm a little confused with that one. Now, he did play sparingly, but due to injuries, that was likely because how he got on the field. Quinn Ewers got injured in the Alabama game, and then Hudson Card came in, played a bit for him, and he did have some success last year with them. In the 4.5 games he played last year as a third-year player, he had 928 yards on 108 attempts, 6 touchdowns to 1 interception, and that's a solid touchdown-to-interception ratio, but I'm not fully sold that he can hang in the Big Ten. Though I will give him props that he takes care of the football. So there are a lot of question marks. You can see why Minnesota should be able to win those games and will likely be favored in those games, but you can't slip up. You can't underestimate them, and you have to go out there and win and dominate and do whatever means necessary to walk out with dubs in those games, because they will be critical for Minnesota having a successful 8+ win season. If they have any hope at it, they have to win all 3 of those games, and that's why they're the most difficult to project. There's a lot on the line. That's going to do it for us here at Locked On Golden Gophers. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you had a good time. We're going to talk some hockey later this week. We're going to talk some more football. Tomorrow, I'll be headed to a presser with some of the players. We'll get the first questioning of the players, so be sure to check out my Twitter at Gophers Kane Rob, or you can find us on Threads as well if you're over there. I'll be posting some of the videos from that and so much more. I'll see you later this week. Row the boat, Sky Mott, go Gophers, and as always, don't forget to subscribe.